In the annals of ancient Rome, amidst tales of military conquests and political intrigue, there exists a hidden narrative, a secret that the Romans themselves seemed eager to conceal from history's gaze. The truth about Rome's boy concubines. What was the real nature of this widespread yet clandestine practice? How did it function within the societal norms and values of the Roman world? And what does it reveal about the complexities of Roman culture and attitudes towards sexuality and power? Welcome to my channel. Today we'll dive into the fascinating yet disturbing world of the Roman elite's predilection for young male companions. Join us as we uncover the scandalous secrets of these illicit relationships, explore their impact on the individuals involved, and shed light on a little-known aspect of ancient Roman history. The first thing that stands out when discussing this subject is that the Romans weren't exactly keeping this a secret. It wasn't like the emperors and elite men of Rome were engaging in these relationships in the shadows, afraid of being caught. Rather, they were well known within Roman society, and although there might have been some hushed tones and discretion regarding the specifics, the practice itself was not considered taboo. In fact, the morality of a sexual act in ancient Rome was not determined by the gender of the participants, but rather by the role each person played in the encounter. Roman society viewed sexual relations through a lens of dominance and submission, not through a modern understanding of sexual orientation. Therefore, the active partner, usually a male, was considered superior, and engaging in homosexual relationships was acceptable, provided he was the one initiating the sexual act and assuming the dominant role. The passive partner could be a male or female slave, and the relationship was viewed through the context of master-slave interaction, not as a relationship between two equals. This brings us to the question, how common was it for Romans to keep young boys as concubines? The answer is quite common. However, it's essential to remember that the vast majority of these relationships involved slaves. For a free Roman man to engage in a relationship with another male, several conditions had to be met. Firstly, the man must have been free and not a slave himself. Secondly, he had to be of higher social status than the other person involved. And finally, he had to assume the active role in the sexual encounter. If these conditions were met, then a Roman man could engage in a consensual relationship with another male, without fear of legal repercussions. However, if any of these conditions were not met, then the act became a crime. If a free man was the passive partner, he risked being labeled as a delicatus, a term that carried significant social stigma. It's important to understand that the concept of homosexuality as a sexual orientation did not exist in ancient Rome. Sexual behavior was viewed solely through the lens of power dynamics. So while a free Roman man could engage with another man, it was crucial that he maintained the dominant position. These boys were not just sexual partners. They were a status symbol. They were a way for wealthy and powerful Roman men to display their wealth and power. By owning a beautiful young boy, a man demonstrated that he had the resources to acquire and maintain such a luxury. Roman literature and art are filled with references to these beautiful, enslaved boys, often called poor delicatus, which translates to delicate boy. They were seen as a luxury for their owners, a privilege reserved for the elite few. The idea of a boy concubine was so ingrained in Roman culture that they were often given as gifts between powerful men. This highlights the transactional nature of these relationships and underscores the fact that these boys were seen as human chattel. Such gifts were made to cement alliances, to reward loyalty, or to express gratitude. The recipient of a boy concubine was both honored and burdened with the responsibility of maintaining another human being as their property. These relationships were not always permanent. Sometimes these boys were shared between influential men, passed around as a symbol of power and prestige. This commodification of human beings is a disturbing aspect of Roman culture that is difficult to reconcile with modern sensibilities. However, it is crucial to understand the historical context in which these practices occurred. The life of a boy concubine was often short and brutal. Their desirability was tied directly to their youth and beauty, and as they aged, their value diminished rapidly. Once they were no longer seen as sexually attractive, they were either discarded or sold to perform other menial tasks. This aspect of the Roman world reveals a stark contrast between the admiration for beauty and youth and the harsh reality of those whose beauty was their commodity. One of the most important things to remember about these relationships is that they involved actual boys, not just young men. Roman law considered these boys to be property, and their masters had absolute rights over them. They could do as they pleased with their bodies, minds, and souls without fear of legal repercussions. This lack of consent or agency is a disturbing aspect of these relationships, and a stark reminder of the brutal realities of slavery in ancient Rome. While it might seem shocking to our modern sensibilities, the Romans did not view these relationships as inherently wrong. In fact, they were quite common and accepted within the broader context of Roman culture. Emperor Nero, infamous for his excesses, reportedly had a number of young male lovers during his reign. His relationships were a source of gossip and scandal, but they did not face any significant social backlash. Even the most powerful men in Rome were not above indulging in these types of relationships. Emperor Hadrian is perhaps the most well-known for his relationship with the young Greek boy Antinous. Hadrian's love for Antinous is legendary, and the depth of his grief when the boy died was palpable throughout the empire. He commissioned numerous statues and works of art in Antinous' honor, and even went so far as to deify him. According to Cassius Dio, Hadrian established a cult of Antinous, complete with its own priests and rituals, which spread from Rome to Greece and Egypt. While this might seem unusual from a modern perspective, it reflects the deep affection and passion Hadrian felt for his young lover. Hadrian's relationship with Antinous, while scandalous by some accounts, was not seen as morally reprehensible by Roman society. It was a time when the boundaries of acceptable behavior were much more fluid, and the relationship between a powerful emperor and a young male concubine was not unheard of. However, it's important to note that while the relationship itself might not have been condemned, the excesses and extravagance surrounding Hadrian's devotion to Antinous might have been viewed as unbecoming of an emperor. Roman law did not explicitly forbid these types of relationships, but it did set out clear guidelines for the treatment of slaves. Masters were expected to treat their slaves as property and not engage in excessive indulgence. The story of Hadrian and Antinous provides a glimpse into the complexities of Roman culture and attitudes towards same-sex relationships and slavery. But what happened to these boys as they grew older? The truth is that their stories often ended in tragedy. As they aged out of their perceived desirability, they were no longer valuable to their owners. Some were eventually manumitted, meaning they were freed from slavery. But this freedom came with significant limitations. Freed slaves were still viewed with suspicion and prejudice by Roman society. It was incredibly difficult for them to secure a respectable position in Roman society, and they were often relegated to menial tasks or seen as a source of cheap labor. Others were simply discarded, left to fend for themselves in a society that offered little to no social safety net. For these boys, the transition from being a prized possession to being unwanted and disposable was a harsh and unsettling experience. Imagine being cherished as a prized possession for your beauty and youth only to be discarded when you no longer fit the desired image. Ultimately, the lives of these boys were marked by a lack of autonomy and the constant threat of abuse. The psychological toll of living in a perpetual state of vulnerability and powerlessness cannot be understated. Despite the hardships they faced, some of these boys managed to carve out a place for themselves in Roman society. Some freed slaves, for instance, went on to live independent lives, possibly even finding new love and companionship outside the rigid confines of Roman tradition. Their stories offer a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak landscape, showcasing the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. In conclusion, the truth about Rome's boy concubines is a complex and troubling one. It involves a systematic objectification and commodification of young boys, who were reduced to mere sexual playthings for the elite. While the practice was not considered taboo by Roman standards, it was deeply disturbing. It was a system that thrived on the subjugation and exploitation of the most vulnerable members of society. These boys were not just objects of desire, they were human beings with feelings, dreams, and hopes. Their stories are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable adversity. I hope today we've been able to shed some light on this little-known aspect of ancient Roman history. If you found this video interesting, please don't forget to share and subscribe.